Sun was just beginning to rise over a small town, casting long shadows across quiet streets and empty sidewalks. In the early hours, most people were still asleep or just starting their day, unaware that this morning would bring a shocking event that would ripple through the entire town. This is a story that speaks to something deeply rooted and unfortunately familiar, a story about prejudice, snap judgments, and the consequences of both. But at its heart, it's also a tale of justice, of confronting biases and of a surprising twist that no one could have seen coming. Before we continue, please like and subscribe instantly 321. Our story centers around two men from completely different backgrounds. One of them, a local police officer, is out patrolling in the early morning, doing what he believes is his duty. The other, a black man who appears to be an average civilian, walks alone on the sidewalk, minding his own business. Little does the officer know, this is no ordinary man. He's the new captain of the police department, stepping out to get a first-hand view of the neighborhood he's been assigned to protect and serve. As fate would have it, these two paths are about to cross in an encounter that will challenge beliefs, expose hidden prejudices, and ultimately lead to a shocking revelation. Stay with us as we dive into this powerful story, one that reveals how dangerous snap judgments can be and reminds us that people are always more than they appear. Out on his morning patrol was Officer John Davies, a middle-aged cop with years on the force. Known for his strict attitude and heavy-handed approach, he saw himself as the town's protector. But over the years, his once clear sense of duty had clouded, replaced by prejudices he didn't care to examine. This morning, he had little patience and even less interest in the quiet citizens he passed by. On the other side of town, a man walked alone down the sidewalk. His name was Marcus Wright. Tall and calm, Marcus wore a simple outfit, a dark jacket, jeans, and a cap pulled low. He was new to the area, but that wasn't his only unfamiliar quality. Marcus had recently been appointed as the police department's new captain. Rather than walking in with a loud introduction, he wanted to understand the streets from the ground level, observing the people and places he would soon protect. As he walked, Marcus took in every detail, hoping to get a feel for the neighborhood. He nodded at a passerby who looked surprised to see him out at such an early hour. He knew he'd stand out in his casual clothes, but he didn't mind. Marcus was determined to build trust with the community, and what better way than to simply walk among them? Officer Davies, meanwhile, was on high alert, though it wasn't the kind that kept communities safe. He noticed the unfamiliar man on the sidewalk from his patrol car and quickly drew conclusions, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Davies was known to question anyone who didn't fit his idea of a regular local, and something about this man just didn't sit right with him. Without hesitation, he turned his patrol car toward Marcus, determined to question him and, if necessary, assert his authority. Davies had no idea that the man he was eyeing with suspicion would soon be his boss, nor did he realize how costly this encounter would be to his reputation and career. With each step, the two men were about to cross paths. One was ready to judge, quick to act on prejudice. The other was quietly observing, focused on understanding the place he was about to serve. What followed would be an intense, unexpected meeting that neither man would ever forget. Marcus continued down the sidewalk, taking in the quiet charm of the town. It was early and only a few people were out, mostly rushing to open up shops or heading to early morning jobs. To him, this town felt different from his last assignment, a city brimming with activity and people of all backgrounds. Here he wanted to understand the community before stepping into his role officially, blending in without drawing attention. Meanwhile, Officer Davies watched Marcus from his patrol car with a deepening suspicion. Something about this man's presence seemed out of place to him. Ignoring the fact that Marcus was simply walking along, minding his own business, Davies decided that this stranger was worth questioning. Pulling his patrol car over, Davies stepped out, adjusting his belt and squaring his shoulders. His body language radiated authority and a need to control the situation. He approached Marcus with a sharp gaze, already making up his mind about the man in front of him. "Hey, you!" Davies called out, his voice rough and commanding. "What are you doing here?" Marcus paused, surprised by the abrupt tone but calm in his response. "Just taking a morning walk," he replied, keeping his voice polite. "Is there an issue, officer?" Davies narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing Marcus as if looking for a reason to escalate the situation. "You're not from around here, are you?" he questioned, his tone laced with an unspoken accusation. "We don't see too many people like you around these parts, especially not this early in the morning." Marcus took a deep breath, sensing the tension but maintaining his composure. He was no stranger to encounters like this. In his years of experience, he had learned to stay calm, knowing that revealing his identity too soon could prevent him from seeing things as they truly were. He simply nodded, giving Davies nothing to fuel his assumptions, but this only seemed to irritate the officer more. Davies took a step closer, his hand resting on his baton, making a show of his authority. "You think you can just walk around here like you own the place?" he sneered. "Maybe you should tell me where you're headed." A small crowd had begun to gather, a few passers-by stopping to observe the escalating interaction. Some glanced at each other, recognizing Officer Davies and exchanging knowing looks. Davies had a reputation, and they knew that he didn't take kindly to anyone he perceived as out of place. Seeing the gathering eyes on him, Marcus decided it was best to de-escalate. "Look, officer," he said calmly, "I'm not here to cause any trouble. I'm just getting familiar with the area." But Davies wasn't listening. To him, Marcus's calmness came off as defiance. Without warning, he stepped forward, shoving Marcus back forcefully. Marcus stumbled but quickly regained his footing, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. The crowd murmured, some in shock, others in quiet disapproval. Marcus held back his frustration, aware that things were spiraling out of control, but unwilling to reveal his identity just yet. He wanted to see if Davies would realize his mistake, but the officer's anger only seemed to grow. "Who do you think you are, walking around here like you own the place?" Davies spat, his face flushed with anger. And then, in a moment of pure impulse, he kicked Marcus, knocking him backward. Gasps filled the air as onlookers took in what had just happened. Marcus, steadying himself, looked up at Davies with a calm but steely gaze. This was the moment he knew he could no longer remain silent. In that split second, Davies started to sense something was off. Marcus's composure, even in the face of humiliation, was unsettling. But before he could process it, Marcus slowly stood up, adjusting his jacket, and took a step toward Davies. The silence was heavy as the two men locked eyes, one filled with rage, the other with an unshakable calm. The crowd watched, wondering what would happen next, unaware that the man standing before them was no ordinary citizen, but their new police captain, ready to deliver a lesson that would shake the community and Officer Davies to its core. As the tension thickened, Marcus knew it was time to reveal the truth. He held Davies's gaze, unflinching, and slowly reached into his jacket. The officer's hand instinctively went to his baton, his stance shifting defensively, but Marcus moved with a measured calm, pulling out his official badge. He held it up, the shining emblem catching the early morning light as the murmurs in the crowd grew louder. "I think it's time I introduce myself," Marcus said, his voice steady but carrying a quiet power. "I'm Marcus Wright, the new captain of this precinct." The reaction was immediate. The onlookers gasped in shock, their expressions shifting from curiosity to astonishment. For a moment, Davies was frozen, his face a mixture of disbelief and dread. He glanced from the badge to Marcus's face, struggling to process the revelation. This man, the one he'd dismissed, insulted, and even assaulted, was his new superior. Marcus allowed a moment for the weight of his words to sink in, his expression unreadable. He knew the power of silence, and in that brief pause he could see Davies's mind racing, the color draining from his face. The reality of what he'd done hit him like a cold wave. "But you can't be," Davies stammered, his words faltering as he realized there was no way out of this. He had overstepped in every possible way, and now the consequences loomed before him. He took a shaky step back, his hand falling from his baton as the confidence and arrogance he had displayed just moments earlier melted away. Marcus didn't move, standing firm and calm as he spoke. "I came out here this morning to understand the community," he said, his voice carrying a calm authority, "to see the people we're supposed to protect and serve. And in doing so, I learned something about this department that I need to address." Davies, his voice barely a whisper, managed to mutter, "Captain, I didn't know." "That's right. Marcus interrupted, his tone sharper now. You didn't know, and that's the problem. You judged me without knowing who I am. But what if I were just any citizen? Is this how you treat the people you've sworn to protect? The crowd watched intently, absorbing every word. Marcus's calm yet powerful presence commanded respect, and the people could see his integrity shining through. He turned to the onlookers, addressing them as much as he was addressing Davies. This town deserves a police department that respects its community, one that sees every individual as equal, regardless of their background, appearance, or the time of day they choose to walk down the street. Davies lowered his head, shame and fear evident in his face. He had humiliated himself in front of his peers, his new captain, and the very people he was meant to protect. There was no going back from this, and he knew it. Seeing Davies' reaction, Marcus softened his tone, yet his words remained firm. Officer Davies, I'll be conducting a full review of your conduct. You're suspended pending further investigation, effective immediately. Davies looked up, his face pale. Captain, please. I've served this town for years. I made a mistake, but it doesn't define me. Marcus held his gaze, weighing the words carefully. Maybe it doesn't define you, but it certainly reveals something important. Your actions today reflected your beliefs, and as an officer of the law, your beliefs shape how you serve this community. We cannot afford to let prejudice dictate how we protect our people. The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding, others watching Davies with a mix of disappointment and judgment. The officer, who had always seen himself as untouchable, was now faced with the reality of his own actions and the very public consequences that came with them. Marcus took a deep breath and looked around at the townspeople. I came here to build trust and transparency, he announced, and that begins with accountability, not just for Davies, but for anyone in this department who allows their personal biases to cloud their duty. Turning back to Davies, Marcus added, this is not only about you, it's about the message this department sends to the entire community. Every resident deserves respect and dignity. If that principle is not upheld, then it's our responsibility as officers of the law to correct it. Davies, now visibly shaken, nodded, finally realizing the gravity of his actions. The arrogance that had once defined him had been stripped away, leaving only a man who had been exposed by his own choices. Marcus leaned in slightly, his voice barely more than a whisper, but filled with determination. Let this be a lesson, Officer Davies. Not just for you, but for everyone who thinks they can act without consequence. From this moment on, the standards in this department are going to change, and it starts here. The crowd looked on, many in silent admiration of Marcus's strength and integrity. His calm yet unyielding approach had not only held Davies accountable, but had set a powerful example for the town and its police force. The silence was thick, but it was filled with respect and a new understanding of what true leadership looked like. As Marcus turned to leave, the townspeople parted, allowing him a path. Davies remained standing there, alone, the weight of his actions hanging heavy on his shoulders. He watched as his new captain walked away, realizing he had crossed paths with a leader who would not let prejudice or abuse of power define his department. In the days that followed, the entire town buzzed with talk of the incident. People discussed what had happened, some still in disbelief that Officer Davies, a long-standing figure in their community, had acted in such a way. And even more shocking was the calm and steady resolve of the new captain, Marcus Wright, who had turned a moment of humiliation into a lesson on accountability and justice. Back at the police station, the atmosphere was tense. Officers who had once looked up to Davies now kept their distance, the story of his actions spreading quickly through the department. No one wanted to be associated with the kind of behavior that he had displayed. There were murmurs of dissatisfaction, but also a sense of anticipation, as everyone wondered what changes Marcus would bring to the precinct. Marcus wasted no time in beginning the departmental review. He called a meeting, gathering the entire force in the briefing room. His approach was direct and without the usual introductions. He stood before them, the same calm authority he had shown during the incident radiating through his presence. Let me be clear, Marcus began, his voice steady. What happened the other day was unacceptable. It went against every value that this department should stand for, and it's not something I intend to ignore or let slide. The room was silent, each officer looking at him with a mix of respect and apprehension. Marcus scanned their faces, pausing just long enough to make sure his words were hitting home. For too long, there's been an unspoken rule here, he continued, one that suggests that as long as you wear the badge, you can act however you please. But let me remind you, all of you, that this badge is a symbol of responsibility, not entitlement. He went on explaining how each officer's actions reflected not only on themselves, but on the entire community they served. The room was still, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone present. Marcus knew that changing the culture of the department would be a challenge, but he was prepared to face it head-on. Turning his attention specifically to Officer Davies, who was seated with his head bowed, Marcus addressed the immediate consequences of his actions. Officer Davies, due to your conduct, you're hereby suspended without pay until further notice. You will undergo mandatory training focusing on community engagement, bias awareness, and respect for the people we serve. Davies looked up, his expression a mixture of resentment and regret. Marcus could see that this was a man grappling with the reality of his own actions. Captain, Davies began hesitantly, I know I made a mistake, but I've served this town for years. Doesn't that count for something? Marcus held his gaze, his expression thoughtful but firm. Longevity doesn't justify poor conduct, he replied. Experience should bring wisdom, not arrogance. I'm here to help this department evolve, to ensure that officers like you, who know this town so well, use that knowledge to protect, not intimidate. The room was silent as Marcus's words settled in. He looked around, taking in the expressions of each officer. He knew that some were struggling with this new standard, while others appeared inspired, perhaps even relieved, to see real leadership in action. As he continued, Marcus emphasized the need for accountability across the board. He didn't want this to be seen as a punishment targeting one person. Rather, he wanted to instill a culture of respect and fairness that would benefit the entire community. From now on, there will be regular evaluations, not just on performance, but on conduct, he announced. Every officer here is expected to uphold the highest standards of integrity. If that's too much to ask, then perhaps this is not the place for you. A few officers shifted uncomfortably, while others nodded in agreement. Marcus's message was clear. There would be no tolerance for prejudice, no room for misconduct. This department would stand as a pillar of respect and protection, or it would change until it did. Marcus also announced new programs aimed at bridging the gap between the community and the police. We'll be holding open forums where residents can voice their concerns directly to us, he explained. It's time to listen to the people we serve and to understand their experiences. This department belongs to the community, not the other way around. As he finished, he looked back at Davies, knowing that the officer had a difficult road ahead. Officer Davies, he said, if you truly want to make amends, I suggest you start by reflecting on why you became a police officer in the first place. Remember the oath you took to serve and protect, not to intimidate or judge. Davies nodded slowly, his expression revealing a flicker of understanding, even if it was buried beneath layers of resentment and pride. He knew his career would never be the same, but perhaps there was still a chance to earn back some respect if he could accept the lesson that Marcus was trying to teach him. In the days that followed, the department began its transformation. Officers attended workshops, discussions, and training sessions aimed at fostering a culture of inclusion and respect. They began reaching out to community leaders, organizing neighborhood events, and working to rebuild trust with the townspeople. Meanwhile, Davies found himself struggling with his own internal battle. He had always prided himself on his work, but Marcus's words had left a mark. Deep down, he realized that his actions had betrayed the very values he claimed to uphold. For the first time in his career, he was forced to confront his own biases and question the way he had treated people over the years. One afternoon, Marcus invited Davies for a private conversation. It wasn't a formal reprimand, nor was it an attempt to chastise him further. Instead, Marcus wanted to understand what had led Davies to this moment, to give him a chance to reflect openly. Tell me, Marcus said gently, why did you become a police officer? Davies paused, caught off guard by the question. He hadn't thought about it in years. I became a cop because I wanted to make a difference, he replied, almost as if hearing the words for the first time. I wanted to protect people, keep them safe. Marcus nodded, encouraging him to continue. Then don't let that get lost in the uniform or the power that comes with it. Remember why you started. This badge is a tool, not a weapon. For Davies, the conversation was a turning point. He realized that he had allowed his authority to blind him, that he had lost sight of the people he was meant to serve. It wouldn't be an easy journey, but for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to redeem himself, to rebuild his reputation and reconnect with his original purpose. As Marcus walked away, leaving Davies to his thoughts, the officer felt the weight of his mistakes, but also a newfound determination. He had been given an opportunity to change, to start over, and for that he was quietly grateful to the man he had once judged so harshly. In the weeks following the incident, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. Growing up, Marcus had experienced his share of prejudice, faced with judgments made solely on his appearance and background. But instead of allowing those experiences to harden him, he had used them as motivation to make a difference. He wanted to show the world that strength didn't come from aggression or fear, but from empathy, understanding, and the ability to stand up for what was right. As he worked his way up the ranks in law enforcement, Marcus had encountered countless situations where he could have let bitterness take root. He had faced resistance, experienced subtle discrimination, and seen many of his peers take the easy route of blending in rather than challenging the status quo. But he knew he had a purpose: to lead by example and change things from within. For Marcus, joining the police force wasn't just a job, it was a calling. He remembered the words of his mentor, a retired officer who had taken him under his wing early in his career. "People will judge you before they know you, Marcus," his mentor had said, "but you have the power to show them who you really are. Wear this badge with pride, not arrogance, and remember that respect is earned, not demanded." These words stayed with Marcus, guiding him through challenging times. He had witnessed firsthand the impact a single good cop could have on a community, how one person could turn fear into trust. And that was the legacy he wanted to leave behind, not one of force, but of respect and service. Davies was hesitant at first, unsure of how he would be received, especially by those who had witnessed the incident with Marcus. But as he stood in the crowd, an elderly man approached him and extended his hand. "I heard what happened," the man said, his tone kind. "And I've also heard that you're trying to change. That's all any of us can ask for." This simple interaction was a pivotal moment for Davies. The community was willing to give him a chance, just as Marcus had. With a renewed sense of purpose, Davies dove into his work, often seeking opportunities to connect with the people he had once viewed with suspicion. He started to visit schools, talk to youth groups, and spend time understanding the challenges local families faced. Each day, he grew more comfortable in his new role, not just as a police officer, but as a trusted figure within the community. Marcus, watching Davies's growth, felt a quiet pride. He had always believed in the power of second chances, but seeing it unfold before him was a reminder of why he had taken this job in the first place. His commitment to integrity and accountability had set an example, proving that change, while difficult, was possible. The department, under Marcus's leadership, became a model for others to follow. Officers were more engaged, motivated not by authority but by a genuine desire to serve. They formed partnerships with local organizations, collaborated on projects to reduce crime, and focused on preventing issues rather than simply responding to them. The community noticed the change too. There was a newfound sense of ease, a trust that hadn't existed before. People were no longer afraid to approach officers on the street. In fact, many greeted them warmly, knowing that these were not just officers, but neighbors, allies who cared about the well-being of the town. As the months went by, Marcus felt a sense of fulfillment. He had taken a department that had been on the brink of losing its connection with the community and turned it into a force that the people respected and trusted. But he knew that his work wasn't over. He continued to meet regularly with officers, holding open discussions on bias, integrity, and accountability, reinforcing the values that had guided him throughout his career. For Davies, the journey was personal. He carried the lessons he had learned with him, vowing to never let his power as an officer overshadow his responsibility to the community. He had seen the damage that prejudice and arrogance could cause, and he was determined to do better, not just for himself, but for everyone who looked to him as a protector. The story of the incident eventually faded from the town's memory, replaced by new stories of cooperation, trust, and community. Marcus and Davies had both left a lasting impact, each in their own way, proving that change was not only possible, but essential. And as they continued their work, they carried with them the knowledge that true strength lay not in authority or power, but in respect, empathy, and the unwavering commitment to justice. This story reminds us of the power of humility, accountability, and second chances. Officer Davies learned that the badge he wore wasn't just about authority, but about responsibility and respect for every individual. Captain Marcus's calm leadership and refusal to tolerate prejudice set a new standard for the department, proving that real change begins with unwavering principles and a commitment to justice. If this story resonated with you, be sure to subscribe. We bring you powerful stories that challenge perceptions, inspire growth, and showcase the true potential of change. Don't miss out. Click subscribe and join us on this journey to see how real people make a difference every day.